Nitesh, can you tell me whether we are audible?
Yes, sir.
Yes,
Yes,
you
sir.
are,
Perfect.
you are audible.
Okay, thank you, thank you. So a warm good afternoon to all of you. Uh, on behalf of Center for Development Studies and the National Research Program on Plantation Development, NRPPD at CDS is a unit that has been instituted by the Ministry of Commerce, and this is a webinar that NRPPD is conducting as part of its mandate to conduct regular webinars during this particular period when we have issues relating to pandemic and so on. Now, the speaker for today is Dr. Lekshmi Nair. I'll introduce her in a minute. Before we introduce her, let me just take a minute to introduce the topic as such. The topic for today's discussion is climate change and sustainable production and consumption of natural rubber in India, and introspect and prospect. Now, rubber production and consumption in the context of climate change is becoming a serious concern globally. Production, arguably because of the monocropial nature of agricultural practices, and consumption, mainly on account of automobile usages. These raises concerns about the impacts of these plantations on the environment, landscapes, and livelihoods. Natural rubber production is dominated by millions of smallholders. By and large, around 90% of the global production and rubber is under small holdings. While the consumption of rubber is monopolistic, with a few tire manufacturers garnering most of the demand for the same. In this context, policy making on sustainable production and consumption of rubber becomes a serious concern as such. Now, we have a person of great eminence with amongst us to speak about this particular issue, climate change and sustainable production. Dr. Lekshmi Nair is currently he's currently head of the economics and statistics at the International Rubber Study Group, Singapore, which is an governmental organization. She has extensive experience in commodity research and in the rubber industry. She represents International Rubber Study Group in multi-stakeholder commodity dialogues, ISO and TC 45 meetings, and discussions on sustainability standards and trade at the national and global levels. She holds a PhD in economics from SOAS and an alumnus of the University of London and Cambridge University. Prior to joining IRSG, she has research and academic association with the University of London, the Australian National University, the Ministry of Commerce and Industry, Government of India. May I now welcome Dr. Lekshmi Nair to deliver her lecture on the topic. Thank you.
Good afternoon and good evening to all of you. It is of great pleasure to me to reconnect with the CDS and to be back with the academic community and the research colleagues. So generally the interaction happening between the policymakers, practitioners and government, but this is a privilege for me to be back with the academic and research community. I thank the CDS and Professor Vinod for giving me this opportunity. As Vinod rightly pointed out, this is now a pressing need of the world. So discussions on climate change and climate-related actions is happening at the national level, international level, and at the global level extensively. So the introduction of this topic by CDS, it's very timely and relevant. Before going to the topic, I will briefly introduce my organization, who we are and what we are doing. Let me share my slide first. Is the slide visible to everyone?
Yes, it is.
Thank you. So International Rubber Study Group is an intergovernmental organization. It started with the headquarters in London and then relocated to Singapore in 2008. I should emphasize that specifically the organization moved from the consuming world of that era towards the right position in the middle of producers and consumers. And IRSG is a forum for discussion of all the matters affecting the supply and demand of natural and synthetic rubber. And beyond providing data analysis and forecast, IRSG is the forum for discussion for all aspects confronting to the rubber industry. We have the producing and consuming government as members and all the value chain of rubber industry as private industry members. So that provides us a great opportunity to interact with the supply chain players to address all the issues confronting the rubber industry. So the work of the organization, of course, in collaboration with all the international organizations in the rubber front and all the UN agencies which work in the agriculture and the sustainability related arena. So in a broader framework of sustainability, IRSG collaborate with the UNTAD, UNDP. UNFSS is the collaboration of the 5 different agencies and various research organizations like International Rubber Research Development Board, World Agroforestry Center, and CIRAD. Of course, there is different multi-stakeholder initiatives are already coming into the rubber space, like a global platform for GPSNR to address the issues on sustainability and the climate change. IRSG work in collaboration with all the producer governments and the consumer governments and with this organization to address it more from a sustainability point of view. So today I like to address the topic which is on climate change and the impact of sustainable production and consumption for natural rubber from a two different angles. One from a climate change crisis perspective and how natural rubber is doing the mitigation and adaptation towards climate change, and what are the discussion going on in the national and the international arena in this topic, and what are the tools it's already there and started adopting to achieve sustainable production and consumption. So climate change, of course, is a challenging issue. A snapshot of the climate crisis and the discussion what is happening in the international arena is it's summarized in this slide. It is a global crisis, a well debated and discussed crisis and need urgent action. So that action is happening and the dialogue is happening and many of the action at the grassroots level is under discussions and moving towards implementation. Land use change is a major source of greenhouse gas emission, and land acquisition for commodity production often displace local livelihood. The pandemic year 2020 has seen the largest number of emission reduction commitment with a focus on green recovery. But at the same time, the pandemic has pushed many people into extreme poverty. If you look into the World Bank estimation, during the pandemic crisis, the people that moved into extreme poverty was estimated to be 190 million to 124 million. That is really huge. Looking at the IPCC 2016 commitment, the target aiming is 1.5 degree temperature increase by the beginning of next decade. But already the climate discussions prior to the Glasgow COP26 concerns are raised. Is the world is moving towards much higher than that. 2.7 is the current estimation, and how the many commitment given by the major countries can attain this 1.5 degree temperature mark. By 2030, the world needs to cut the greenhouse gas emission by 50%. And of course, we are well underway to a transition to net zero before 2050. If you look at the conversion of primary forest for into other land uses, the tropic has lost around 11.9 million hectares of tree cover in 2019. That's the last estimate available. If I took that as a proxy, that is equivalent to the size of South Korea. At least 1.8 gigatons of carbon dioxide emission are associated with the pre-pandemic primary forest loss. It's converting that, yes, that is equivalent to 400 million passenger car emission. It's huge. When managed sustainably, working forests actually help to slow the climate change through the carbon sequestration and the long-term carbon storage. But often this is overlooked. And this is an area where the natural rubber, which is classified under forestry by FAO, has a potential role to play to address the climate crisis and addressing the climate mitigation and adaptation. For any discussion on climate and climate related aspect, of course, we need reliable information, and data is key for any assessment of the impact. I'm introducing basic facts with most of you, those who are in the rubber field or the commodity field, are very much known to all these facts. Natural rubber is particularly an interesting example with respect to sustainability objective, being a strategic commodity which is produced by millions of small growers, and also that is going as a main commodity for transport and new forms of mobility. And rubber sustain around 40 million people around the world with their families. And the supply chain is generating more than $300 billion. Natural rubber as a tropical commodity is grown with an annual temperature of 26 to 28 degrees, both sides of the equator, with a rainfall of 1,800 to 2,500 mm. Furthermore, as Professor Vinod already mentioned, it's 90% of the production is coming from small holdings. This is across most of the countries with a couple of exceptions. Interestingly, this may be a disparity for natural rubber when you compare to some of the other plantation crops where it is predominantly coming from big plantations, and the average size is much higher than natural rubber. So therefore, the natural rubber is key for the sustainable development of commodity producing countries and the commodity value chain. And the global rubber demand is rapidly increasing over the last decade, driven by the economic development and also economic development of emerging market in Asia Pacific region. So the climate change, what it is happening to the natural rubber sector, I'm just briefly introducing some the basic challenges and opportunities within natural rubber. About 13 million hectares of rubber area globally, and the sector is producing last year, of course, it is lower than the earlier year, 30 million tons per year, 90% are small grower, and average productivity is 1 tons per hectare. Of course, the productivity is an important element as the production is coming from millions of small farmers. And which are the major producing regions for natural rubber? More than 70% of the natural rubber production is coming from Southeast Asian countries, Thailand, Indonesia, Vietnam. These are the first three major producers of natural rubber. And West African country, Ivory Coast, is rapidly expanding, and now Ivory Coast is in the fourth largest producer of natural rubber, and then it is the next two position is for China and India. Both have a critical role because both these producers are the two major consumers globally. And the East Asian producing countries like Cambodia, Laos, where there is large expansion of the surface area is happening. Certainly, these are the areas where increasingly the consuming segment and the international environment activists are looking for the environmental degradation and the forest conversion likely happening. So looking at the rubber consumption, as rightly mentioned, the two major countries, China and India, is taking a major share of the global rubber consumption, and especially into the natural rubber, China takes more than 1/3 of the global usage. This is mainly driven by the growth happening in the automotive and the transport segment, especially from the beginning of last decade. Last 2 decades of rapid growth of automotive industry, that is from around 60% to 40% now, both coming from the domestic and the international tire majors, this expansion is happening. US and EU are the two major partners, especially for the China's tire exports. So what China is produced in the domestic market it's not only for the domestic production, that is to cater to the replacement market of the mature economies, especially US and Europe. How the global value chain transition is supporting, one way it is contributing to the climate change and also transitioning the trade between the regions. So the production is concentrated in Southeast Asia and South Asia, and the consumption it's also in this region, but the product is moving from this region to the rest of the world. So across the decade, there is a transition already happened. If you look at this trade map, it is very visible. The China as the major consumer from Southeast Asian producing countries, the trade is happening within that Asia Pacific region. But I have not brought the product trademark. But when we look at the product trademark, that is also bring the same pattern because the products are produced within the region and the products are exported from this region to the mature market in US as well as Europe. So this global value chain and the transition that's happening in the value chain, of course, bring a challenge on what it has happened because of the pandemic and the supply chain disruption, which is continuing and happened due to the pandemic, and also to what extent this is going to continue and impact reshaping the global value chain. So one way we can see that global value chain is value addition is bringing for many global economies, but because of the pandemic, the changes which is happening in the value chain, the global value chain is slightly transitioning to the regional value chain. Looking at the natural rubber economy and the changing facets, rubber is a main livelihood for millions of farmers and their families. If you look the Indian situation, around 1.3 million small rubber growers with more than 500,000 workers in the rubber sector. 91% of the production is coming from the small holding sector, and the average size of the holding is lowest among all the producing countries. So India is a special case here. And the major NR producing countries, among all the major NR producing countries, the lowest average size, farm size of 0.57 hectare. So this is another challenge which is posing for the natural rubber economy when the scale of operation is changing, and some of the challenges like due to erratic weather, spread of diseases, then the viability of the small holdings itself is a question, and whether the small growers are going to stay with this small size of the holdings. So all over the world, farming is becoming less attractive over the years. Labor-intensive farming is one challenge, and specific to India and some of the Southeast Asian producing countries, labor is becoming a great challenge because availability of the labor is an issue. When you look at the cost of production of natural rubber, around 70% of the cost is contributed by the labor. And then the family profile of the smallholders are changing, especially when you look at the Indian situation because of the economic development in the main producing region, Kerala. The labor availability is a constraint, and also the age profile of the family farms and the participation of the youth and women is totally missing in most of the smallholder farmings in the traditional rubber growing regions. So one key example which is pointed out in the case of Kerala holdings is increasing number of the part-time farmers. So rubber is not the main income of the farmer, and then majority of the small growers are not subsistent farmers, and they are not using their family labor as tappers. So this brings a great challenge. Then price volatility and the climate change, this is faced by across all the small growers globally, and it is not an issue specific to the Indian case. Price volatility is a great challenge for most of the small growers across the world, but the fundamental factors that influencing price is demand and supply. It's from a general market point of view, but beyond the market fundamentals like rubber demand and supply, there are other factors which influence, especially the natural rubber, the substitute price. So the other substitute for natural rubber is synthetic rubber, which is produced from the fuel-based feedstock, that is the butadiene, and the butadiene is the feedstock for production of synthetic rubber. So butadiene production also, it's greatly affected by the climate irregularities, cyclones, flooding. So because of the specialty nature of that product, once the producing region or the plants get affected, that immediately get affected in the supply, and that will affect the SBR price in the region. So the SBR price trends have a greater influence on the NR price trend, and beyond that, because of the financialization of the commodities, it's beyond the actual market players. Many are entering into the natural rubber commodity market, and speculation is there, and that is also causing the volatility. But the actual players and the tail end of the supply chain in the rubber market, the small growers, is greatly affected by this. And one reason for the low productivity is it's because of the volatility. Many small farmers are not tapping the trees or moving from rubber tapping to other economic activities. So another factor influencing the production and productivity is the surface area. So the surface area has a direct impact on the total production and also the total productivity. Look at globally, it's the planted rubber area has increased substantially during the price boom period. That is from 2005 to 8. That's the first phase of the price boom. And from 2012 onwards, that's the second phase of the price boom. These two price period, large expansion has happened. Around 25% of the total rubber area increase was happened in the non-traditional region. So this itself is a concern for some of the players. Is this expansion happened at the cost of the conversion of forest, or this expansion happening from other crops? If we look into the major rubber producing countries, for example, the case of Thailand, large expansion happened both in the traditional and the non-traditional area. And for Vietnam, this is more happened in the traditional region. But for the Mekong region, Cambodia, Laos, and Myanmar, around, I should say, around 25% of the expansion happened. That also happened to a great extent from other crops, and some areas from degraded forest, and even some areas there are concerned that it happened from conversion of forest. When we look into the Indian scenario, it is something different from the other major producing countries. India is both a producer and consumer, and the rubber production is concentrated in the traditional rubber region, Kerala. And Kerala itself is, I don't need to bring on the Kerala's development model in a research community and academic community of CDS, but still that itself places India in a different trajectory when it's looking at the production expansion programs, and also at why the production is declining over the years, specifically for India. So the major is country, sixth largest producer, second largest consumer. India has around 1 million tons of production capacity, and total rubber area is 823,000 hectares. The mature area comes to 609, around 700,000 hectares. But out of that mature area, around 75% is tapped. And then for the production also, the type of the rubber produced, there is a distinction for India compared to the rest of the world. India, of the total production, India produces around 65 to 70% in the sheet rubber form, where globally the production is happening in the form of block rubber, which is called a technically specified rubber. So the supply chain of at the global level and the supply chain at the India level is slightly different, and also the intermediaries involved in the supply chain also makes a big difference for getting a larger share of the market price for the growers. Looking at the production and consumption statistics of rubber as a rapidly growing consuming market, around 75% of the consumption is growing into tire and mobility related areas. India has a great potential for expansion, but of course that expansion is restricted because traditional region that expansion is not possible, and because of that the expansion is happening in the northeastern state. And an interesting example for rubber sector in India is it's recently the announcement which the Rubber Board of India, as well as in collaboration with the private sector, it's a collaborative program of the government and the private sector, a 200,000 expansion, 200,000 hectare expansion program is scheduled to be for the next 5 to 7 years, and that is going to happen focused on the northeastern states. But even that 200,000 hectares of expansion, India may need more rubber to meet the demand requirement. With the IRSG's forecast, India with this expansion program, still India is going to produce around 1.5 million tons of rubber, but India need by end of this decade around 2 million tons of rubber. That's still around 400,000 deficit will be there by end of the decade. That means India has to continue depending on the international market for meeting its rubber requirement. So this is the supply chain for globally, where the rubber is originated, especially from the small growers. Whether it is in India or all other major producing countries, it's going through a different process. But the first part of origination is not mostly not applicable to the Indian case, where now India produces around 17% of the block rubber only. Majority of the rubber is coming into the sheet rubber form, which is directly going from the origination phase to the distribution phase. It's mainly going directly to the end consumer. So the in between the production phase is totally, I should say, totally missing in the case of India, and also this is an advantage for the Indian market because of the lesser number of intermediaries. A greater share of the market price is going to the small holdings. Many studies has already done for the Indian market. And recently in one of the discussion I heard from a group of small growers from Karnataka pointing out that it's around 90% of the market price that RPS could deliver to the small growers. That is really an amazing thing, where when we compare that to an Indonesian small grower, they are getting only 50% of the market price. That makes a big difference for the economic side of the sustainability, where the value chain players has to really look into, and the need for value addition of the tail end of the value chain players starts from that point itself. The consumption growth rightly happening from the mobility segment, and great potential for the India as a second largest consumer. It is there, but as we all know that the pandemic has disrupted the global growth. This is not for any major countries. This happened across the countries. But specifically, if you look at the major consumer, China, even though that pandemic started from there, China is the first major economy to come out of the pandemic by first half of the last year itself. So one looking at the passenger car sales numbers, which is a direct proxy for assessing the rubber consumption growth, both for natural and synthetic rubber. So we can see that it's a dip for last year, February. China rapidly came out of that. And then for the rest of the world, as it's that slowdown started happening from the April onwards. India it's a different story. It is from that impact was there for April and May months. April was more or less zero consumption, and then rapidly started moving into the consumption growth, and Q4 was a very strong growth for the Indian economy, and as well as for the mobility segment, both passenger as well as commercial vehicle. But it is the pandemic impact is a direct impact on the miles driven, and also have impact on the freight movement. So that's the reason why this PC market as well as commercial vehicle markets are equally affected in all the major countries. So what is this impact going to bring into the regional consumption share? So Asia Pacific region is a major region which is absorbing the supply and demand, with China, India, Thailand, Japan, Malaysia as a major growth center. So because of the pandemic, yes, this shift is already is changing. If you compare 2009 and the pre-pandemic situation and the pandemic situation, is Asia Pacific region share has increased from 74% to 76%. That is mainly because of the recovery of China, which has happened by middle of 2020. But if you look at the Europe and US, what it is happening, even though they have lost their consumption share, the most of the production which is going to the replacement market for the those two regions are catered by the Asia Pacific region. So one extent this pandemic related supply chain disruption is causing the movement of raw material. On the other side, the pandemic related disruption which is coming into the chip which is going into the automotive sector. Many of the automobiles production is getting delayed on one end, and the delays in getting the raw material. Because of this, the tire companies using their capacities in Europe and US to meet to the OEM demand, and for the replacement demand as the economy is recovering fast and people started traveling and people started driving for leisure and other purposes. So replacement demand is increasing, and that replacement market is more met by the product which is exported from the Asia Pacific region. So this is an interesting dimension of the impact of the pandemic into the regional share of the rubber consumption. And looking into, I'm just trying to summarize from what we have seen from a global perspective and what we are facing and what we are seeing from an Indian case, both for production and consumption, and what is the road ahead for an Indian case. Indian economy is growing, yes, even though it is IMF has downgraded the GDP growth for India from 11% to 9.5%. It's in the July update, but still it's a good growth, and the mobility sector is rapidly growing, and that impact certainly will be there for the rubber consumption, and that will be there by the end of this decade. But of course, there is a gap between production and consumption. That gap will remain there till by the end of this decade. Government and private sector are supporting for capacity building, and also supporting policies are there for plantation development, enhancing the productivity of the plantations, and providing extension services. What are the challenges? First is mainly the labor issues, which is it's a continuing issue for the Indian rubber sector. Different policies and discussions are already with the rubber board. A rubber board is coming up with a tappers bank, and but when it's come to the pandemic and a lot of travel restrictions, and many have lost the job and then moving from farming to other economic activities, is very difficult to get tappers, and that is reflected in the declining share of the tap to mature area. So that will get reflected in the declining yield, which is of course all with the research and extension support, because India's yield is always pointed out as a model yield for many other countries because of the research support that the government of India is providing, and also the very good extension support and good model of rubber producing societies. But this is a challenge for attaining sustainability, and also because of the climate change variations, traditional rubber growing regions are moving, and also soil conditions are changing, and the drought is causing low productivity, and some of the regions good for production are moving to a region where it is not good for production. All these factors are impacting the present situation, as well as this is going to stay as a challenge for the Indian rubber production. Then it's from a consumption point of view, emission commitment and emission reduction commitment of the automotive and the transport sector is a great challenge, and also at the same time it is an opportunity for different players to start working with automotive sector commitment of CO2 reduction. It has to come from the supply chain, not only from one raw material, it has to come from the different raw material together. So companies are investing in the research and development, changing designs for complex raw material, reducing the emission control, which is coming from the sound reduction and the rolling resistance. So it's an opportunity for sustainability of the consumption, and I will look that more into the coming slides, how that could be addressed from a sustainable development perspective, taking into account of UN Sustainable Development Goals. One looking into the Sustainable Development Goals, it's the three dimension: economic dimension, environmental dimension, and the social dimension. Among the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, Sustainable Development Goal 1 is the no poverty. Sustainable Development Goal 5, it is gender equality. 8 for decent work and economic growth. These are the social and economic side which the rubber sector can focus on. But when it's come to the environmental side, it is Sustainable Development Goal 13, the climate action, and Sustainable Development Goal 11, it is sustainable cities, which is linked with the mobility and the transport sector. And Sustainable Development Goal 12, sustainable production and consumption, were which need to take into account of both left side of this flow chart and the right side of this flow chart. So this is an area where IRSG is mainly focusing on to collaborate with the major international agencies, governments, and different producing and consuming sectors to address how sustainable production and consumption could be possible to achieve, addressing the environmental aspects through SDG 13 and 11, and the social and economic aspect from covering SDG 5, 1, 8. And this is, of course, possible through collaboration. That certainly is addressed through SDG 15 and SDG 17, the global growth through collaboration. So looking this perspective, and we have organized a global workshop on climate change and natural rubber, and most of those issues we discussed in that workshop I'm trying to summarize, and these are the factors which is need to address in all the producing countries to bring the natural rubber more into the international discussion, and also bring natural rubber into the policy perspective of or India. For India's national policy on rubber, most of these topics I understood that is already enclosed. Looking at the impact of climate change on rubber, it is, of course, these are all based on the scientific research done in various rubber research institute and international research organization like ICRAD and Agroforestry Center. Yes, this is happening, climate change is happening, and because of the climate change, productivity is changing, production is moving from one region to other region, but of course then already established region we are losing, and then again the new region when coming into the new planting, then the question is that how those new planting is coming into the national rubber. Is it that coming from a primary forest or a secondary forest, or this is happening from a degraded forest? So there is a concern impact of climate change on rubber and how that rubber impact the climate change. How rubber impact the climate change is that is because of the land use changes. As the first slide of my presentation clearly pointed out, that land use change for agriculture purpose is a concern. And the greenhouse emission linked to rubber sector is significant when the conversion is happening from primary forests. This is a case many NGOs are pointed out in the case of Mekong region, especially Cambodia and Laos. Then when it's looking from a consumer perspective, is that one topic which overlooked is scope 3 emission. So there are scope 2 emissions and the scope 3 emission which need to account the direct and the indirect emission. So the scope 3 emission, if the tire manufacturing or automotive companies are looking into, they have to look that into their supply chain first, how they could bring their supply chain sustainably in working with, in collaboration with all the value chain players. So improving the integration of the rubber in the national determined contribution and the national adaptation plans, how that is possible. So evidence are already there in many researches in terms of the economic growth, employment it is bringing in, mitigation happening, green economy transition that is happening. And the sector that is how it is contributing for adaptation. Of course, we at the global level, this is at an inflection point. So any changes to support a green transition is helpful, and that need to get accounted in the national determined contribution. But some countries are already bringing natural rubber into the national adaptation plans when it is replanting is happening, not only rubber, and rubber is bringing in as a diversified system. So this is another dimension which is increasingly pointed out in the discussions in the climate conference, how an enabling environment for sustainable rubber production can be brought in. So this can be rubber plus other crops. This might be in the immature phase. Different crops can be brought in. Rubber Research Institute of India has done many research like other rubber research institute. So the question is also to be addressed here, when this conversion is happening, what is the type of area it is converting? The potential of rubber to contribute to mitigation therefore depends on what it replaces and how that replacement is happening. If it replaces a primary forest, carbon is lost, and it replaces a degraded forest, a carbon sink increases. And also the carbon sink for the rubber wood. And if the rubber wood is used as a fuel for green energy, or that can be accounted for the carbon calculation. And if well managed rubber tree plantation, it's all those carbon accounting is taken into account, it is equivalent to a tropical forest. So this is the positive side of that, where the natural rubber and the climate change association need to be emphasized when it's come to the dialogue at the national and the international level. And there is great potential for collaboration and discussion, and bringing this topic even at the IPCC level for the discussion, and at the COP26 for IRDB and the World Agroforestry Center, IRSG, working with the UN organization to bring a topic of discussion to address how natural rubber can contribute to um, as a factor of discussion for the climate change dialogues. And also to achieve this, the diversified approaches, of course, the small growers need to provide support. And what are the type of support the farmers need to be given? So what are the agencies involved in that? Access to high quality genetic materials and good technology for the farmers, capacity building programs, and new techniques. This is possible through the technology transfer and the extension support. Here in this specifically to the Indian case, the RPS is a good example where I know that the CDS and the NFPD has done some work on this line. It's RPS is the interface between the consumers and the producers to bring many of the ongoing challenges which faced by the small growers is possible to address through this small grower group and the RPS, because the consumers can use this as a nodal agencies and to do many of the pilot projects to bring in a case that if the small grower group is coming together and pooling their production and processing is done at that RPS level, of course, the quality can be improved. The quality improvement is certainly will lead to the value addition in the value chain, rather than asking for a premium for the quality product or a sustainably sourced product. So even through the RPS, if a value chain traceability is done using enabling technologies, it is possible to address the fact that all the agro-management practices are done sustainably, and also there is no use of fertilizers or weedicide which is harmful to the soil, or it is any of the treatment of the water when sheeting application is done, if it's more of consolidation is happening at the PS level. All these factors could be certainly addressed when the processing is more consolidated and RPS is coming in between as an interface within the ecosystem of the producer, small grower producer, and the consumer, whether it is a tire company or it is a glove manufacturing company or it is other rubber product manufacturing company, where they are increasingly have to address their CO2 emissions and their sustainability credential, which the customer is asking for. So moving to the mobility phase, this is more addressing the sustainable consumption. It is clean energy, connected mobility. This is the new forms of mobility which globally everybody started addressing, and India is also slowly coming into that phase. We have a carbon budget and the target of 1.5 degree temperature, global warming to achieve. And many countries and the regions has already made commitment of 50% reduction in their emission by 2030 or even 2050. And India, China, the major consuming countries and also major carbon emitters, it's made the commitment for 2060 and 2050. So by 2035, more than 95% of the car and the truck would need to be a zero emission vehicle. And of course, they need to look into the renewable sources of materials and the connected mobility. And because of all these commitment, it's coming from the consuming industry. Tire manufacturing and the mobility are rapidly changing. So instead of a tire as a product, tire companies are placing themselves as sustainability mobility solution provider and the service provider. So sustainability commitment in manufacturing is already there through the CO2 emission control. and they are committing to the supply chain, sustainability of the supply chain, and committing for design innovation, renewable sources, and at the same time, circularity is very much part of mm, the long-term sustainability commitment. So when looking at this is research of a global tire company, approximately 89% of the tire's life cycle greenhouse gas emission is in the use phase. 15 to 20% is in fuel consumption, and of course the rolling resistance is where they can bring down the CO2 emission, and where many research and collaboration is there for bringing complex raw material. 80% of the tire life cycle emission is created by the manufacture and transport of material, and only 1% is created by recycling of the used tires. So recycling is another area where for the sustainable consumption, increasingly the mobility is bringing pressure. The tire companies are working more on that. So that will bring less pressure to use the virgin resources. So the raw material efficiency will be certainly there for bringing a circular economy. So as of now, less than 10% of the material is used by the industry from recycling. And every year, more than 1 billion tires is reaching by end of the life cycle. So if 65% of the ELT is collected for reuse, and roughly 70% are recycled to get it back, maybe certainly it is natural rubber and synthetic rubber and reclaimed rubber separately, and other material used for tire getting separated, that itself is it's less burden on the environment and the climate, and less virgin raw materials needed for to meet the increasing requirement of the consuming industry. So reuse, eco-design, waste prevention, enhancing resource efficiency, that could bring reduced usage of the raw material. Of course, this certainly will bring a cost saving to the business, and to bring the equity in the supply chain and the value chain of the rubber product and the rubber consuming industries. Certainly when cost saving is happening from the raw material side and from the business, that is getting distributed in the supply chain, and that can bring the sustainable consumption perspective to achieve the sustainable development goal for the rubber sector. So these are some of the discussion. I just like to brief some of the climate change discussion which is happened and continuing within the global segment, and certainly this is very much applicable to the Indian sector. Need for more research, more collaboration among the science-based research as well as the policy-based research, and this business is very much need to be an integral part of this, because business brings solution problems to in terms of the CO2 emission, but they can be the solution provider to bring sustainable development goals and to meet the long-term commitment of sustainability. To bring the supply chain into a sustainability mode, there are different factors to combat the climate change. So one element is what are the tools to look into the sustainability credentials which contribute to the climate change. So minimizing risk of deforestation and forest degradation is an increasingly addressed point, both from social activists, environmental activists, and from the policymakers, both at the national level and the international level. How that is possible to address this? First start from the supply chain of the producer and the supply chain of the consumer. Look for that what all discussion we had in the earlier slides, and which is already addressed in the different climate change discussion. But how it is possible to bring that the supply chain of the major consumers are sustainable? or how can be a region to bring that regulation. So there are many new regulations. Is legal framework is under discussion. For example, I'm giving one example is in Europe, there is Green Deal is already in place, and the European Commission is discussing to bring raw material entering in the Europe should be deforestation free. So there are sustainability tools to address this, and there should be enough data and transparency for the value chain and how that is possible. There are technologies already there. Technology innovations are happening. Blockchain is one area where one can look into what is happening in the supply chain. Traceability and accountability is part of that, to do a benchmarking based on mm, a set of criteria and indicators. So there are different initiatives already in for different commodities, and the discussion is already happening, and even from dialogue and discussion, there are some implementation is already happening. So there are different voluntary standards very much into the commodity space. And these are the norms and standards used to ensure that products is produced, processed, and transported in accordance with a certain set of sustainability metrics. Mostly these metrics are focused on social and environmental sustainability. But of course, there are at the same time increasing concerns are there. Is these tools are effective for uptake of sustainability progress, because these tools are coming up by a certain group of NGOs. It could be a private standard, it could be a voluntary standard, or it could be a platform and partnership, whether it can be at the national level or international level, or NGOs are campaigning for that. Many private standards are already there for different commodities. I should say around more than 300 voluntary sustainability standards are there. So that itself is becoming another question, whether is that effective to have a sustainability progress assessment. Um, so for fostering green export, or bringing a systemic transformation of the value chain, taking account of all the value chain players, especially the small growers, bringing equity to the value chain. These are some concerns already addressed for the voluntary sustainability standards as a tools for effective sustainability and sustainable production and consumption. But of course, this is not a niche market now. Sustainability is very much part of the mainstream market access now. So this is the part of business strategy of all the private sector. This is the DNA now. So what are the way forward to look into this? How can we do the accountability side? How to assure that there is transparency, and how to assure that it is inclusive of all the value chain players? This is a key aspect. And already some examples are there for comparing what it is happening and what it has happened, and comparing the tools with the sustainable development goals. Some of the sustainability initiative in the different commodities space, some progress has already made, but I should say that those players already committed in that space might certainly be the early adopters, but to adopt that more into the small farmers and medium and small scale enterprises, of course, it has to abide, or there need to be support for those players to adopt to this type of sustainability commitment. This sustainability commitment, of course, certainly can be brought into comparing with what are the goals achieved in terms of the SGDs, and we can do a proper assessment of where each sector and each economy stands in terms of the sustainable development of the different commodities. So I'm just like to bring this whole perspective from the sustainable production and the sustainable consumption of the natural rubber, and how that is contributing to the adaptation and the mitigation. So the key takeaway I like to re-emphasize here for the major players, for both the policymakers, academia, researchers, and the practitioners, the private Paris Agreement, of course, there is opportunities, and it created already opportunities for the natural rubber. With the complex agroforestry system and diversified value chain, there is immense opportunity to address many of the challenges. And sustainability is it's not niche market. It is the mainstream market, and it is considered as a tool for market access, and this is part of the global value chain. Increasing industry commitment to circularity to incorporate increasing amount of sustainable materials, that is also happening. So renewable use of resources, minimum waste, reusing, recycling, these are more part of the sustainability strategy, both for the consumers and for some of the processing industries. And to address this, of course, technology is key, and innovative forms of cooperation across the national borders is happening, both at the government, business, academia, civil society. But of course, it re-emphasizes here, all these collaboration, it need to be inclusive, fair, and resilient for a climate-friendly growth for natural rubber, addressing both production and consumption. I would like to stop this, and it's very much an interesting note. I like to stop it here for everyone. This is very much visible in different social media, where it's a cartoon addressing, okay, large scale deforestation is happening. Yes, it is happening. But if there is a will, we can overcome it, and we can address this in collaboration with all the value chain players for the benefit of the next generation, which is increasingly all the young climate activists are asking for the policymakers, researchers, and the practitioners to address. Thank you. I'm open for a discussion on any of the point I addressed in this discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Lakshmi, for that very interesting lecture, opening up issues relating to natural rubber consumption and production, issues, global issues with regard to production, then sustainability issues, climate change issues, and how policy is being built around sustainable use of rubber itself, rubber production and use as well. Thank you very much. Now the floor is open for questions and comments. If you have questions, you can directly ask, unmute yourself and ask the questions, or else if you want to put it in the chat box, you can ask that also. That you can put in the chat box also.
May I ask one question?
Yes, Professor Ulmani, Director.
Dr. Nair, see, when we talk about the competition between natural and synthetic rubber, in future, with fossil fuels being reduced and synthetic rubber being based on petrochemical feedstocks, will become a difficult thing in the future. So do you think that the price of natural rubber will increase, the demand for natural rubber will increase as a result?
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Suleimani, for that question. This is interestingly is the question. It's most of the discussions on rubber usually address, of course, natural and synthetic rubber are the two elastomers which is going into the major inducer application tire. In some of those application, it is not possible to replace natural rubber by any of the alternate raw material. But in some cases, for example, it is, as I mentioned in one of the earliest slides, rolling resistance. it's for reducing the CO2 emission. It's a performance efficiency, a complex raw material, which is not possible to reduce, because which is specialty synthetic rubber is coming into that type of application. For passenger car segment, as moving quickly from into the electric vehicle market, and the design of the tires are changing, and to meet the requirement of that mobility segment, some of the complexities need to be addressed, and that segment will remain a niche market. And because of that, yes, synthetic rubber consumption, I don't think that with the emission reduction control, more and more countries are focusing to move from the combustion engine based mobility to EV market. It's already happening. China is leading it and Europe is following. And for US, it is with the new administration and the big climate commitment and announcement of monetary policy supporting that. Certainly everybody is moving towards. India also made big commitment. Certain areas it's not possible. They have to use synthetic rubber, but these players, the fuel-based, fossil-based, fuel-based application segment, BD as well as synthetic rubber, they are looking, and they are under pressure to look into the bio-based applications. So bio-based synthetic rubber is evolving. A lot of research commitment is already there to address their CO2 emission control. And also many of the manufacturing segment is moving the energy application from electricity or coal to the green energy. So investment is happening for green segment, and at the international level, green finance is there to support this level of investment for this transition to happen smoothly. I doubt I tried to answer your question.
Yeah, thank you. Okay.
In the meantime, when people are asking, by the time people are getting ready, there are one or two questions with regard to data in the chat box. Mr. Chandrasekharan Nair has written, how can we believe on supply and demand with arithmetical errors, probably with regard to the data on this thing. Can you make some comments on the data with regard to?
Yes, because data, reliability of the data is very much important, and how we collect the data, how we review the data, and how we validate the data. Because data is key for any policymakers to make reliable policy scheduling. It's not for government, it's also equally important for the business to make strategy decisions. So the scenario planning is very much there for day-to-day operations of the business. And natural rubber being a long-term commodity crop with an initial investment of mature phase of 7 years. So even for the governments to encourage the small growers to commit for the plantation expansion, data is very relevant. So IRSG as an organization at the global level for collecting the information and sharing the reliable information with the stakeholders. I'm saying that it's a challenging exercise, but it is possible to provide reliable information. Errors, of course, can be there when the government report the data, and especially for rubber area expansion happening. But along with the government shared information, of course, technology is there. So satellite technology is also started using to review what it is reported by different government agencies. So we, at the IRSG level, we work with different international agencies who use satellite information, and we validate this at different levels. But still, of course, it's when it's come to the data on production, which is of course a reflection of what it is there as mature area, there can be errors. Yes, but it is how we can minimize the errors, and how that errors can be reviewed at a different time point to bring a reliable information that is more important and that is relevant for any forecasting exercise based on the actual data. So it is more than forecasting now. It is now casting is getting more and more important, and as the world is changing quite fast and rapidly.
Thank you. Yes, Professor Matthew Kurian.
First of all, I thank Dr. Lekshmi Nair for the excellent presentation covering all the aspects of the rubber economy of the world as well as of India and Kerala. I have two specific questions to you. One, you referred to the capacity of rubber plantations in carbon sequestration. My query is, can it be taken as an additional source of income for the farmers? That is question number one. Number two, regarding price stability. We know that regional as well as national price, that is to a very large extent derived from international price. In that case, international price stability is of great significance. On that score, we know that prior to WTO, we had under international commodity agreements, but that is now, it has become part of history. So in the post WTO, where international free trade agreements are there, what may be your suggestion from an international commodity market point of view to have price stability? These are my specific two questions. Thank you very much again for your beautiful presentation.
Thank you, Dr. Mathurian, for that two key and pertinent questions. First, specific to the creating value for the carbon sequestration potential of natural rubber, how farmers get benefited. This is discussed widely in different recent discussion. If you look at the supply chain, and at each point, if we can account the data, because data is very much important. Without the data, it is not possible to account for the carbon. So it's starting from the plantation. Yes, we need to have a traceability for that, and there are technology tools now in place to account for that. From each point, we can have that carbon transfer payment. For example, starting from the land origin, if a technology tool like blockchain is used, we can count on that at each point, from the latex to capillum to a sheet to other segment, and or it is from the latex to the gloves. We can do a calculation and make a transfer payment, and the farmer will get benefited. But of course, that traceability should be there, and the data points should be there to get the benefit. And it's farmer may not be able to do it because this is a costly exercise. There need to be some collaborative and coordinated action there, either at the national level, because it is always good to have this type of assessment at the national level rather than doing it, because different countries have different supply chain, and then the approach is also different. Even though the methodology is the same, the approach certainly will be different based on the different national situations. So this is actually under discussion, and some of the tools are in place, and some of the major tire companies is actually have developed their own tools. But these are on their commercial side, their own calculation, because they made the commitment and they have to show that their supply chain is emission free or carbon neutral by 2030. So they have these tools. For example, I'm just giving one example. It is the major tire company Michelin has a tool which they developed, rubber waste, which is going from the tire to the small farmer. So they can account everything, but that's only for their commercial side. It's like that. For the supporting the small growers, rubber board, research institutes or IRDB, IRSG, or even it's some of the technology side collaborators can come together with some green finance support. Yes, this is possible. It's actually happening in the case of this only one country which actually implemented that, and the benefit is getting, that is Guatemala, because there is not actually any small grower, majority are the plantation based production system, and it's a huge cost when you are doing it your own at the plantation level. And then the next question you have addressed on the price stability, I should say this is price and price stability was there in early from the 1930 onwards, and then it is, as you mentioned, UNCTAD, INRO, and then WTO, all those discussions. But now most of the international discussion or IRSG discussion, which is happening between both producer government, consumer government, and actually the players in the market and the leading exchanges, because now they are very much in the ecosystem. Singapore Exchange, Shanghai Futures Exchange are the two major exchanges. Also the Tokyo Japan Exchange are the three major exchanges where futures market is operating, and the futures market operation becoming a tracking tool for the physical market to follow. So now the market is open and nobody is coming to intervene or interfere the market action. Although by principle and theory, it is the fundamental factors are influencing price, the demand and supply. But if you look at beyond that, it is the speculative element is happening in the market. And as more and more the commodity are going beyond the actual players of the market, the speculative players are there, as China's role is getting more and more visible in that market. Many private funds are supporting it, and each market and each exchange is telling the discovery process is very much visible. Nobody is controlling it, but of course this speculation has some control or some impact on the price and the price variability, because beyond that, whether it is high price or low price, is the price volatility. That's not good for any market players. So some discussions are ongoing between the exchanges and trying to bring, even the exchanges are also under pressure to address the sustainability issues, and the SGD based commitment are there. Reporting is already there. They have to report, for example, in the Singapore exchange already made mandatory that the SGD based reporting. So the sustainability report is mandatory. So each of the company actually operating in there or listing in that exchange have to have a sustainability reporting based on the socio-economic and the governance indicators. So in open market, it is less and less market intervention is happening. It is open to the players and the actions and fundamentals, and speculation is, fortunately or unfortunately, it's a part of that. It is continuing. Thank you.
Any other questions? Anyone else would like to ask a question or a comment? We have another question in the chat box. Is sustainable development going to affect the rubber industry inversely, both with regard to demand and supply for rubber boots probably?
I should frankly say that it's not going to happen, because maybe it's 10 years ago or 15 years ago when such a question is addressed. If nobody is it's ready to open up and start talking on sustainability. But at the current phase or current world, everybody is addressing sustainability. You have to do the business. Sustainability become the core strategy of any business. So without sustainability, it is impossible to do a business. It's beyond branding. This is becoming a market reality, a market access. And you can create value for the product you are producing sustainably. And I'm not saying you may get a price margin, but certainly that product, you will get deeper market access and penetration with if you are producing a product with the sustainability norms. So both for production and consumption, certainly with the product coming into the market, meeting the sustainability credential is, there is a demand, certainly. So it's not going to affect either the production or consumption.
Thank you. I have, let me just raise one or two questions by the time others would ask. I have two small questions to ask. Most of the rubber producers are basically small farmers, small land holdings, and some of the suggestions with regard to environmental sustainability is with regard to intercropping. So how far does it work in small farms? How far does intercropping work as a solution for what we call sustainable production? That's one question. The second question is regard to specifically to Kerala and India, that is RPSs, the way in which RPSs function. We have been doing some studies on RPSs and the way in which it has been dying off. The functioning of RPSs had been quite weak over a period of time. It is becoming less and less active. Though it started off in a great way and it had been functioning for many years, many decades actually. But currently it is becoming weaker and weaker. How to keep it sustainable, because that's a big economically sustainable, because that's a big connection between the producers and probably the remaining part of the chain itself. So it's one of the big nodes as such. So these are the two issues I thought.
Thank you, Professor Minosh, because this is the topic. Certainly, it's I happen to be in another meeting this week itself with the major tar companies and the group of small growers addressing the same question. So how could be the RPS be an effective tool between the producers and the consumers to deliver the sustainability? For the Indian context and especially for the Kerala context, is the small size of the farms. It's a challenge. It's for addressing this multi-cropping pattern. But many of the examples or the science-based evidence and the current price volatility and less dependence on the or availability of the wage labor for the tapping operations, that is going to be a challenge. So then it is how we can encourage when a farmer is doing replanting, instead of going for rubber alone, it is rubber plus other crops. When it is that will give a balanced income. Whatever be that variability between the crops, certainly it is with an immature phase of 5 to 7 years for natural rubber. That phase, if the farmer is fully depending on farming for his subsistence income, yes, this can be addressed. But it is for Kerala, certainly it's a totally different story, and it is no one can compare a Kerala small farmer, which is it's not at all a subsistent farmer. I should say it very much frankly. It is majority are part-time farmers and they have other jobs, other incomes, or it is or NRIs, or it's a different storyline for a small grower farmer. But I have noticed, and I'm getting different feedback, that when a replanting is happening, many small growers are thinking of rubber plus other crops. So that is a positive storyline to build in for what the science is talking about from an implementation point of view. But of course, if the policymakers or the rubber board or some collaboration is there between the producer and consumer, because Now, what the consumer need from the producer, they have to work with the producer to deliver that. So they have to support for getting it delivered. They need to create value in the value chain. And for creation of that value for the value chain, RPS is the right nodal agency where they can deliver that. So the consumer can ask for that to have good quality, consistent quality. This is what the consumer need. And also they want to have the traceability of the rubber which is coming from the small growers. It is possible, but of course there's collaboration is needed and some funding support is needed. So that is very much vital, but I understood that many of those private sector it's open and some of them are willing to work with RPS to become RPS as a nodal agency. And also it's a good example, it is RPS can be used even to demonstrate the sustainability development goal of gender equality. So if they can use more female family members, or it is especially in the case of Kerala, it is there are different opportunities are there. It is the system is there at the grassroots level. The people, those who are the female counterpart or the workers from there can be used, then the gender equality can be re-emphasized there and the quality can be assured, and instead of each farmer processing sheet at the farm level, that can be pooled. Of course, there should be some transportation mode to collect that raw material from the small growers to the RPS. So the processing can be consolidated rather than doing at the fragmented level at the farming.
Are there any other questions? Anyone would like to raise any more questions?
Dr. Lekshmi, I think being present here, I was listening to the speech. I'm Murli Gopal from Apollo Tires. Since you raised a valid point like the CDS also from the mail link you sent to me, I understand CDS is also into actively considering the rejuvenating the RPS system in Kerala. But certainly I can give some suggestions on this. The question is whether the RPS can be made viable. It can definitely be made viable. And in my association with so many years of thing in this particular rubber field, especially with various rubber producing societies in various parts of the country, I find that the major problem the rubber producing societies are facing, we can divide into two or three. One is primarily, see, there were a good voluntary services available for leading the rubber producing societies probably around 10-20 years back. But that generation has vanished. Now there is absolutely nobody who will work for free. Work for free is a concept which has gone now. So you have to replace that work for free concept with the sharing of profit. And the leadership, I think now the dissemination of information is very easy. Not much complication is required there. Everybody know what it does. But one model what we all can try is if a society is working there, the most important part in that society is the people who make work there. So why not we put an experiment that the leadership of that particular society will be transferred to the people who work there? Instead of wage earning, that should be converted into some profit sharing method for the workers also. But I find in all the society model, the thinking of the people are outdated. Now the in thinking has to come. So possibly young generation has to be inducted, and then profit sharing should be there. And then another part is why not we include the tappers also into the chain. The tappers also should be used to take up active part in sheet making, which is actually giving much more income to them, and then make another possibility of giving further employment to the tappers and their associates who are is involved in that RPS business, some additional income in any form. Like even I would suggest that some tailoring unit, even you can think out of the box, and we should be utilizing that. Then tapper, I think the CDS, if studying one idea, what I am, which is coming to my mind is actually a tapper now 1 week a tapping is the what the rubber board recommends, that 1 week a tap is weekly once a tap is sufficient. So that means 4 times or 2 times the tapper effect can be utilized. The only thing is that he should be provided with economical mobility for him. He can be mobile for long distances. And if an RPS is, we are recommending that 300 hectares of land for viability of one RPS, one or two tappers should be sufficient for, I mean, area to do this tapping if we reduce to 1 week. And then tire industry, because I am a part of tire industry, the tire industry is ready to buy their product at market rate, which is already happening. So why not it is giving success? The problem is this only. I am finding very beautiful societies running. I mean, very good societies running beautifully well. In the Palghat side, is there enough examples? Is there? You are young, possibly the CDS team can visit them and understand the elements of success there. What is the contribution of the elements which is contributing to their success? Document it and try to transform that learning to other kind of societies. It is possible because now, please understand, the government is also encouraging the tire companies. In fact, we have agreed to participate in a development rubber development process in Northeast. And understand one more thing, larger role of this sustainability. The moment we don't use our plantation, the rubber board chairman already indicated that 30% of the plantations are not being tapped. There is a wonderful opportunity for contract farming there. Their contract farming can be enabled with a e-platform. That can be done. Sharing of labor can be done. So that if we are bringing into another model for study, then the what is the kind of money the Kerala is going to get? So last time as Lakshmi was mentioning, last week we had a seminar, and after the seminar, even though in seminar some of the people were vociferous that 180 rupees should be there, 200 rupees there. After the meeting, somebody called me and said, see, look, if 130 rupees is there, we are more than happy. It will break even. And there is no crop like rubber which can be tapped for 365 days. And the market is there. Even if you produce 10 lakh tons of rubber in a year in India, you have a ready market. We have the consumption of 10 lakh, which is growing at a rate of 10%. And what we are producing is only 5 lakh ton. 50% gap is already there. And 30% of your planted area is lying untapped. There is a huge potential for it. Please target it. It is only our willpower. And I really appreciate agency like CDS has come forward to study this cooperative sector in rubber, which is a very good in thing which has to be done for the betterment of the society. Thank you.
Thank you, Murli.
Thank you, Murli.
Yes, I think Dr. Matthew Kurian, you would like to
Yes.
quickly.
Yes, I won't take much time because this RPSs instigated me to speak because I happened to be engaged some years back in a minor project on RPSs that was entrusted to me by CDS. So that gave in my mind. So I have RPS is a very good forum in the sense that we can have different levels of RPSs. For primary processing, we can have certain RPSs. Then we can have a network and some nodal RPSs, RPSs may be there, which can think about value-added products. So I think in the last budget, Kerala budget, which was submitted by Dr. Thomas Isaac, there was a suggestion that we should have a rubber park. I think that is in the premise of Vellore newsprint factory. And in that case, I hope we can have this sort of different stages of processing, which will definitely enhance the market strength of primary producers. So we have to rediscover RPSs and its culture. That is my suggestion. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Any other comments, suggestions anyone would like to quickly make a comment. We have actually crossed the time. So if there is anyone who would like to make a last comment, can make a quick intervention. Okay, I think we don't have any more comments here. Thank you very much, Dr. Lakshmi. That your talk was quite enlightening. You have opened up a lot of issues for researchers like us. This gives a plethora of issues to work on right now uh, regarding the global demand supply as well as the issues related to sustainability, both economic, environmental, and social issues related to sustainability. And you have raised the interest of many who had raised questions right now. Thank you very much for giving that wonderful lecture. I hope both as NRPPD and CDS can use your resources further in future also, and hopeful to have a what's called fruitful collaboration in future also. Thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Professor Vinoj. And also, I like to thank CDS and also like to re-emphasize that there are opportunity for future collaboration when it's IRSC as an intergovernmental organization. We have flexibility of working with the research organization, either formally with an MOU or it is informal agreement on supporting you, guiding you, or even working together on a project. It is possible, any sort of future collaboration. I'm quite
Thank you.
happy to collaborate in the future on any opportunity arise.
Thank you very
Thank
much.
you very
Thank
much.
you very much.
It's a
Very
pleasure to be back with the group
Yeah.
of enlightened, and especially to hear from Dr. Matthew Kurian and Professor Sunil Mani. It's really is a great pleasure to be back with you. Thank you very much for
Thank
this
you. Thank you.
opportunity.
Yes, thank you. Now we are closing the session. Thank you very much.
Thank you.